Now, if you're hoping for something, that means you don't yet have it, right? Because if you had it, you don't hope for it. You only hope for what you do not yet have, Romans chapter 8. So if you don't have it, you're hoping for it. But faith is the title deed of what I hope for. That means that if I have the title deed to something, I must then believe I already own the thing that I'm hoping for. Do you understand? I mean, let me say it this way. What he's trying to tell us is faith is having such confidence that you see you possessing what you do not yet have in your possession. Let that sink down. Because you only get a title deed if you own something. So faith is so sure that God is going to grant you the thing you're hoping for. You're so sure it's going to happen that you already have the title deed to it. It's as good as yours. You don't yet possess it, but faith is seeing that you possess what you do not yet have in your possession. And if you don't have that kind of faith, and you're like, well, I'm hoping that God does something. Well, do you believe he's going to? Well, I sure hope he does. Well, do you count it as good as done? Well, no, because you never know what God's going to do. Then you don't have the title deed, do you? You really don't have faith. The reason why I like the Amplified Bible, it was written by a great number of Greek and Hebrew scholars. And what they did is they understood that the Greek and Hebrew have some words that are used that one English word or one Spanish word could never convey. And this is one of those words. When the Hebrew writer says faith is the assurance, that word was used to speak of surety. You know, when you put a down payment for something, that means that down payment is a surety that you actually are going to get the thing. Do you understand? And so the Greek scholars understood that word surety, and they said it means a title deed. That when someone is so sure they're going to get something, they get a title deed for it. So that means if I am in faith for the thing I'm hoping for, I have to be so confident that I believe I have a title deed to it. If I don't have the title deed to what I hope for, then I'm not going to get what I hope for. I got to have this confidence that it is really mine before I actually see it. That's faith. And when you really look at it that way, you start to realize, Pastor, I don't think I'm that much in faith then. I've been hoping and praying, but I haven't had the title deed to it. Go over to Jeremiah 32. There's an interesting story. One of my favorite prophetic stories is Hebrews 32, and it relates to this concept of title deed. Let me give you a quick background of what's going on in Jeremiah chapter 32. Jeremiah had just predicted and said God told him that the Babylonian kingdom was going to take over the Jews and their holy land, and that when they take it over, they're going to be in charge for 70 years. And then after 70 years, God is going to give back the Holy Land to the people of God. Well, no one believed Jeremiah. All the prophets of prosperity, they just could not imagine that could happen. But Jeremiah said God has showed him it's going to happen. Well, finally, everyone's looking at Jeremiah and saying, Jeremiah, we didn't believe you, but it's coming to pass. Because all of a sudden, Judah and Jerusalem finds themselves surrounded by the Babylonian kingdom. And now it is clear that Babylon is going to invade the Holy Land, and there's nothing that the Jews had in their arsenal that could defeat this great kingdom. It would be like the United States coming to attack Iraq. How many of y'all know pretty much Iraq knew they weren't going to win? There's just not the power. And that's how Judah felt. They knew there was no power. So guess what happens? Jeremiah has a cousin who's a bit greedy. And he comes to Jeremiah and says, hey, Jeremiah, let's make a deal. I want to sell my property. Well, how many of y'all know you know what he's doing. He knows the property is going to be government owned, right? And what good is a property then when the government owns it? So he's telling Jeremiah, I want to sell you some property. It's very similar to my family. The Browns, I had a great-grandfather who went into Mexico. He was actually a Mexican. I'm actually from a Mexican family. But my great-grandfather, he went to Mexico, and he was a silver miner, and there he met a Mexican wife and married her. So I do have some Mexican blood. Well, my great-grandfather, he owned a lot of silver mines, and he was very wealthy, very successful. My grandfather tells me that they had a nice ranch. I mean, it was really a good life until the revolution hit Mexico. When the revolution came, they took over all the silver mines, and thus my great-grandfather had to move out of Mexico so he wouldn't get killed, and that's why they moved to El Paso, Texas. And that's the history of my family. Well, I give that because we can relate to what happens when the government owns the property. Then all private property doesn't mean anything, right? Well, that's what's happening. Jeremiah's cousin is recognizing the handwriting on the wall. The Babylonian kingdom's going to own the Holy Land. So he says, hey cousin, you want to buy my property? That's like, this is cheap property. So what does Jeremiah do? Well, Jeremiah recognizes God told him that this is going to happen, but it's only going to last for 70 years. So Jeremiah, you know what he does? He makes a deal. Look at Jeremiah 32, verse 8. Then just as the Lord had said, my cousin Hanamel came to me in the courtyard of the garden and said, buy my field at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin, since it is your right to redeem it and buy it. Possess it, buy it for yourself. I knew this was the word of the Lord, so I bought the field at Anathoth from my cousin Hanamel. Why did he buy it? You know why? God said Babylon won't own it forever. It will be returned back to the owners in 70 years. So he bought it. Now jump down to verse 13. In their presence I gave Baruch these instructions. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Take these documents, both the sealed and unsealed copies of the deed of purchase. What is it? The title deed. He said, take the title deed. What is faith? Faith is the title deed of what you hope for. He said, take the title deed and put it in a clay jar that will last a long time. For this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Houses, fields, and vineyards will again be bought in this land. After I had given the deed of purchase to Baruch, I prayed to the Lord. So now, I love this story because this illustrates the title deed as far as faith is concerned. Jeremiah is absolutely convinced that this great world empire called Babylon will no longer have control over the Holy Land in 70 years. He is so convinced, you know what he does? I'm going to have a title deed to it. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm buying this property and I'm going to put it in a glass jar, something that will last a long time, and I'm going to put it away, maybe bury it or put it in the shelf, and I'm going to remind my son, and my son should remind his grandson, and they should remind their son, because they are owners of this property, because a day will come when this world empire will cease to be a world empire, and we'll give back our Holy Land. And to prove it, I have a title deed to it. Now, is he sure? See, do you see how the title deed is proof that he really believes the word of God, that they're going to get what they hope for? And friend, the lesson is quite simple. Sometimes it looks like the enemy is overtaking us, and it looks like the promises of God are worthless to us. We know he's promised to heal us, but it doesn't look like it's happening. He's promised to take care of us financially, but it doesn't look like it's happening. He's promised to turn your spouse around, but it doesn't look like it's happening. He's promised to bless your ministry, but it doesn't look like it's happening. And it's so easy at that moment to say, it's so easy to be acting like the cousin of Jeremiah. I want to ask you, do you have the heart of the cousin, or do you have the heart of Jeremiah?